I went into debt $13,000 there, but it was my dream to work there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do whatever it takes within reason to work in Congress because it's my dream to be part of Congress.
Pay tuition to kind of go to Congress.
Yeah, kind of.
Diva Asma, you were a neuroscience PhD student. You grew up watching C-SPAN and televised brain surgeries, and you quit your PhD to pursue freelance science writing and also working in Congress. How did that happen?
Well, so it's kind of a long story. In retrospect, it makes sense, but at the time, it was actually a very long journey and it wasn't on purpose. So when I was a kid, I used to watch brain surgeries on the Learning Channel, and I was really excited because, in brain surgeries, they don't put you to sleep during the brain surgery. They just have you awake and they open your brain because they want to know if your brain is like doing the right functions. So I was really into that as a kid. And it was a little bit, it's kind of like, they just showed the brain and they'd be poking at the brain and they showed the person in the operating room. But I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I followed this interest throughout high school. I also was good at writing in high school, and I got a couple of national awards for my writing. But I was really shocked when I applied to colleges and I got into MIT off of the wait list. And so I was like, well, I guess I will go to MIT and study science. But I had already gotten a full ride to the University of Oklahoma, which is the school, my state school where I live in Oklahoma. So I gave up my full ride to college to go to MIT with only 3 months notice. And so this kind of changed the trajectory of my life in a way because I had never been on a plane before. I had never been to Massachusetts before, which is where MIT is. And I grew up Democrat, and everyone told me, Massachusetts is a great place to be as a Democrat. It's the land of the Kennedys. And I love the Kennedys growing up because I grew up watching C-SPAN, and I would see all the politicians talk and everything. And there are specific members of Congress that I really idolized. And so when I went to college, I declared chemical engineering because I was pre-med at the time. My career path took a lot of different twists and turns. But because I was like, I want to be a doctor so I can be a brain surgeon. But then chemical engineering at MIT is actually like incredibly difficult. So I didn't, as someone that has the like neuroscience, like I should have just studied neuroscience. But for some reason, I just wanted to do Chem E, which was, I don't regret it. I learned the systems thinking and I really enjoyed that. But it became a bit much doing chemical engineering at the best place for chemical engineering when that wasn't really my like deep unabiding interest. My deep unabiding interest was in the brain. So I switched majors my junior year.
Question before you go on. I think this happens to us more often than we realize, where we have a clear interest in something, but we end up choosing something else. In your case, what do you think influenced that?
Well, I think part of it was I was like, well, I can just major in anything in STEM and I don't think it'll matter. And I had
Oh,
never really taken engineering courses. I had taken science courses and I really did well in the life sciences. But another part of it, I think, which is really hard, especially as a woman in science, is just trying to prove that I
mm,
had the right STEM skills. And I think I was trying to maybe impress people by saying, look, I'm studying engineering. Like, look how cool this is. And actually, I do love chemistry and I do appreciate engineering and systems thinking. But, and then like, I just didn't think it really mattered. I guess I hadn't checked the rankings about like, if you want to do engineering at MIT, you have to really like engineering and that like needs to be what you want to do. But if you want to do neuroscience, you should just do neuroscience. Like I wish I had followed my heart and just studied neuroscience, but I'm actually really grateful for the path I took where I kind of wasn't afraid to fail. Well, I failed at chemical engineering and then I picked myself up and just kept working in my undergraduate years. 3 weeks into my junior year, I went to the MIT Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences undergraduate advisor guy, and I was like, look, I'm really smart. I can catch up really fast. I really want to study brain and cognitive sciences, which is what neuroscience is called at MIT. It kind of includes psychology and cognitive science. And I was like, you have to let me be in this program. I promise I will make you proud, kind of making an appeal. And I was like, I really love neuroplasticity. Like, you have to, like, neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to rewire itself. So they were like, okay, fine. 3 weeks into the semester, you can totally just change your major. This was my junior year. So I was like, I had to do a lot of different things to get all the right credits to graduate on time. And I was like, I had decided I would study PhD instead of pre-med. And so I got all my courses. I took a course one summer at the University of Oklahoma, which is where I live. So here in Norman. And yeah, so I completed my MIT degree in 4 years, which I'm still really proud of to this day. And then I spent 3 years working at Massachusetts General Hospital as a research assistant. And I studied Massachusetts General Hospital is like one of the main areas that led the way in functional magnetic resonance imaging and other types of brain imaging. So I assisted with some studies looking at the role of alcohol on the brain and basically like doing all sorts of things to make sure that these imaging studies could run properly. I helped my advisor by editing her R01 grant, and we got that grant. So by that time, I was editing personal statements for people and stuff. And so after my 3 years working at MGH, which is now I think called Mass Brigham, I don't know what it's called, but the Massachusetts General Hospital Navy Yard, which is where I was working in the imaging part of Massachusetts General Hospital. Then I applied to graduate schools. I had actually applied before, but I didn't get in right after I graduated from college. But I applied again, and I decided I really wanted to go to Georgetown because it was in Washington, D.C., which is close to all of the Capitol Hill and our government.
And what
So
happened? What happened that made you? Because you go from getting a degree in neuroscience, you're working at Mass General on fMRI, and then you decide to go pursue this PhD in DC, which is close to the Capitol. But what switched in you wanting to think about being close to government?
well, part of it was I really introspected on like what I really want to do with my life. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to do something with science that involves policy. And as an undergraduate in college, I had applied to work in Congress to serve in the House Committee on Science and Space and something. It's like the Science Committee of the House and worked on some political campaigns. I one summer when I was living in Oklahoma, I was working on a Senate campaign and I was doing research at the University of Oklahoma. So um, I kind of had I knew that I wanted to do science policy in some way, but at the time, the only way to do science policy was to get your PhD and then basically, and I wanted to work in Congress. And so the only way I knew to do that was the AAAS fellowships, which are a fellowship you can get if you get your PhD. So I was like, I'm going to get my PhD. I'm going to apply to this fellowship so I can do science policy.
Oh, so you go to DC to pursue this PhD in neuroscience, I'm assuming.
Yes, in
And then,
neuroscience.
yeah, and then a few years later, you decide you don't want to do it anymore.
Well, so it was actually a little bit more complicated than that. So what
Mm,
happened was my project was so I was studying this project looking at the brains of people that had PTSD, and we had, I think, 12 subjects, and
mhm.
that's not enough. We had an underpowered um, data set. So I
Right.
tried to do another project. About adolescent decision making. I asked my advisor. I helped my advisor get this grant. I spent every week I'd be in their office explaining different aspects of different decision making paradigms. So we got this grant on adolescent decision making. But by then I was 5 years into my PhD program, and I submitted a paper to the Journal of Traumatic Stress Studies from my PTSD work, and that didn't get accepted. And um, it sort of started to it just the other project I actually became a PhD candidate And I went to one of my meetings with my thesis committee, and I had this idea that because I had worked as a research assistant, I would be able to do my research project with the new study really quickly. So I told them this, and they didn't believe me. So they were like, "Well, do you want to leave with your master's?" That was something that they offered me, which we had just created this master's in passing at Georgetown in the interdisciplinary program in neuroscience, because it's an interdisciplinary program as well. So, so I was like, yeah, give me the master's. I talked to my advisor. He was like, what do you want to do with your life? I was like, I would like to pursue science policy and science communication. And he was like, you don't need a PhD to do that. So I left my graduate program and I was like, I guess I'll try to figure out what to do next. And so I became a freelance science writer. The moment I left graduate school, I was like, well, I'm going to monetize my writing skills. So I created an Upwork profile and I just got some clients. I went to different, I was trying to get back into science for several years. I applied to graduate school to Georgetown so many times they banned me from reapplying because I was like, I need to finish what I started. I really want to get a PhD because it's also kind of a loss of identity when you leave academia, like you're no longer working on really cool science. And I have learned that this is actually not that uncommon for people to just leave their programs. Um, so anyone out there that is listening to this interview, I just want to let you know that if you've left your PhD program or you've left your job or something, you're definitely not alone. Career twists and turns happen all the time, and what really matters is like how you bounce back from them. So, and I've definitely experienced a lot of different career twists and turns on my journey. I just celebrated 5 years of being a small business owner though. So for one period of time, I've been doing something for 5 years continuously for the past 5 years. So running,
Congratulations.
thank you. So it's
Yeah.
been interesting and cool.
Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode. Yeah, it's a big deal. Being self-employed or being a small business owner and doing it consistently for 5 years, that's half a decade, right? That is incredible. And I just want to congratulate you on that. I also want to say, I love the point you made about the fact that, people quitting their PhD programs is not as you may feel in the moment, you may feel like you're alone, right? But it's not as uncommon as some people may think. And over the course of my career, also saw people who mastered out and went on to do incredible things. And so, yes, I know that one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people is the sunk cost fallacy, right? The idea that you've spent so much time on something and therefore you must continue to pursue it when maybe a pivot could have been the better choice for you. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Now I want to take a few steps back though. You talk about, mastering out and then starting your freelance writing business and then your science policy consulting. You went on Upwork, and for those listening that don't know what Upwork is, it's a freelancing website. You can set up a profile there, and people can hire you to do work for them. So let's talk about how you got started, because maybe somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, I want to do something close to what Shiva is doing. How should they start? How did you start?
Well, I had wanted to I had thought about freelancing before, but the thing holding me back was having a portfolio. So I just went on Upwork. At the time, it was actually called Elance.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I should have said it was called Elance back in 2014 or so.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
it kind of feels ancient now to think
Yeah.
about. Freelancing wasn't a thing. Now it's way more established. But yeah, I literally just went to the website. I filled out all the spaces, created a profile, and I was surprised that people actually started contacting me pretty quickly. And I was like, well, I guess I could make a few extra dollars from this. It wasn't anything like really substantive financially, but it was something to do. And I was applying for federal jobs at the time because I wanted to continue my working in DC and living in DC. But over time, actually living in DC became expensive. So I moved back to Oklahoma and I got more serious about my freelancing. And then I decided I wanted to work in Congress. I had spent some time in graduate school advocating in Capitol Hill and going to members of Congress and talking to them about science with the Society for Neuroscience. So I really enjoyed that and I really missed that. And I missed DC. So I spent probably a good 6 months applying to jobs in the House and the Senate. And first I got an offer from a Republican lawmaker and from Arkansas. And I was like, well, I really want to work for him, but I don't have the money to do that right now. So I said no to that one. And then I got another offer from a Democrat in Democrat lawmaker, and I said yes. And so I packed up all my belongings. Back then were like 2 or 3 boxes. I packed up my belongings. I drove from Oklahoma to Washington, D.C., and I stayed in this hotel, and I couldn't find housing. So I just lived in a hotel for 2.5 months. And every day I would dress up in my business clothes. I would walk out of my hotel feeling so strange because I've never lived in a hotel before. And then I would just go to the Capitol Hill and do my work and come back.
What kind of work were you doing there? When you say you go to, when somebody says they go to work on Capitol Hill, and in your specific role, what were you doing?
So I was hired as a legislative intern. So there's many different branches of work you can do in Congress. You can do legislative work, which is like working on laws and policies. You can do communications work, which is like creating social media posts for members of Congress. You can do scheduling. There's like a person that schedules stuff for the member of Congress. There's the chief of staff runs everyone. So Congress has two main jobs. One of the jobs is to create policies. The other job is to represent the people. So, I mean, some of the stuff I did, so being an intern is the lowest rung on the ladder in Congress. And it's really hard to go from being someone that, I mean, it wasn't difficult. It was just a change to go from being someone that was studying a PhD in neuroscience to being someone that is on the very entry level of Congress. But when I'd get there, what a day in my life would look like is I'd get my coffee, hop on the metro rail, then I would get to the office. I would organize the newspapers so they would look good in the members' DC office because we worked in the DC office. And then I might I might answer some phones for a while. I might go to like a briefing or two. I ended up going to a lot of briefings. And the reason was someone called in the middle of, it was 2017. It was around the end of the Obama administration, the beginning of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. And someone called and asked, they were like, hello, do you know if Obamacare is still going to exist? So I told them this like analysis of like, well, here's why Obamacare, Affordable Care Act may or may not exist. And I did this really good analysis, and I really think that my analysis was perfect. And that's what I end up doing now in my job. But then after I put down the phone, the person, my boss, who was actually 20-ish and younger than me, it was like, you're not supposed to give out information like that on the phone because the communications is very tightly controlled in Congress. So they were like, why don't you, instead of answering the phones, which our phones are ringing off the hook in a Democrat office, in the beginning of the first Trump administration, they were like, why don't you go to some briefings? Here's some briefings. So I went to different briefings. I went to one about rare diseases. I went to one about immigration. I went to one about civil liberties. And you would just go to the briefing, sit through the briefing, then you would have 1 hour, only 1 hour, to just write a summary of what happened and then just give it back to the office, and then they would use that in their policy making. And sometimes if there was something they needed, like there was a bill that they had written a press release for and they wanted someone to proofread it, and they were like, oh, you're a writer, why don't you just read this for us really fast and just proofread it and let us know, like, does it need any improvements? And then because I was a scientist, once they needed something about a rare genetic disease explained to them, to the more senior legislative staffers. So I was kind of like my role was unique because I think I was the only scientist in that office. So I did a bunch of science stuff, and that was really cool.
So yeah, it's amazing. So you went, I like that, you really went twists and curves, like you said earlier. So you do this for 2.5 months, and then what happens after that?
So after that, well, this part of the story I think is it starts to get a little bit expensive living in a hotel in DC, and I never had time to go. Um, the cost of housing at that time, it was very expensive, and there were some famous people that couldn't even find a place to live there, so they were also in the news for not being able to find a place to live. So I went into debt $13,000 and because I was paying like 100 something a day just to like live there, but it was my dream to work there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do whatever it takes within reason to work in Congress because it's my dream to be part of Congress. Because and like, it's still taken me like, it's been what, like almost a decade since then. And I am still paying my credit card debt down, but it's almost paid. Um, so yeah, so what happened was I basically, well, what really happened
You pay,
was,
in a way, you pay tuition to kind of go to Congress.
yeah, kind of. And it was, and it kind of reveals something about working in Congress is these aren't paid jobs. I think some now they're more paid, but they don't pay you to work in Congress. So if you want to work in Congress, you have to find a way to fit it into your life financially. And that might not be possible for a lot of people, but I'm one of those people that believes that if you really want to do something, you can figure out a way to like make it happen. And maybe that's because I mean, I've benefited. There's a lot
There's
to
lots.
unpack
And,
there.
and that's what I want to get into. So now you paid tuition to work in Congress, and then you came back to Oklahoma and started
Mhm.
your business. How did the skills you learn? So now we've talked about your experiences in education or in the academic system. We've talked about your experiences in Congress. How did you marry those experiences to do what you're doing now? How did they help you?
Well, they helped me a lot. And part of it was I decided in my marketing, I would say, I've worked in Congress. I mean, I didn't say it like that. I would just say, like, I'm a former legislative intern in the US House of Representatives. And people would look at that. And I guess it meant something to them that I had worked in Congress. And I did it only because I had gone into debt so much. I decided I'm going
It
to
was
turn
going to
this
be
into,
worth something.
yeah. And it turned out to be very valuable because one time I had a client, I forget what he wanted exactly. I think he wanted me to write a white paper, and I was like, he gave me this thing that he told me his idea for like what he needed from the white paper, and I was like, okay. And then he was like, you've worked in Congress, right? You can handle this. And I was like, oh, all right, yeah. So that I think that gave people, for whatever reason, it gave people confidence because working in Congress is very fast paced and it's something people know about and they interact with. And Congress and science, as I have like written about and talked about, they're kind of two different worlds. Congress is very much about very relational. It's about one-on-one relationships where science is more about like facts. And in truth, both of them are both about facts and personal relationships, but until you step into the policy world, you as a scientist, you don't realize how different they are. But then you also realize, wow, there's a lot of space for scientists to be in Congress. Like, why aren't there more scientists in Congress? That was one of my first thoughts when I stepped onto Congress. So the analytical reasoning that scientists have translates very well to policy analysis. So one of the first things I did when I got back from my internship was start doing policy analysis. I started working with a Washington, D.C. based think tank, small business, analyzing U.S. trade policy. And that was really interesting because they needed someone to basically track the bills that were going through Congress and see like how likely it was that they might pass, what the people had said about them, what was being said in the news about them, and sort of to follow those things. So I really literally applied my legislative skills directly to do that. And I think I also learned a little bit about public relations working in Congress because in Congress, more so than in anything I have ever worked in any field, appearances matter so much to the point where there used to be this or it was a Twitter account back when Twitter was called Twitter, and it would tweet out edits to different Wikipedia pages of members of Congress, and sometimes and they would show where the edits were coming from, and sometimes members of Congress would edit their own Wikipedia pages to make themselves look better. So that's the kind of place that I was working in after spending almost my whole life in science, and it was it was honestly, I want to say it was a rude awakening about how money and power and all of those things intersect, but it was also incredibly a powerful experience because it also showed me that a single person can do a lot. And so I most recently in September of 2024, I helped organize a an advocacy event with Patients for Patient Safety, which is, I guess I volunteer for them, but I also wrote press releases for them. So they're kind of my client as well. And we went to Capitol Hill. We organized this day of action, or actually it was like a weekend or week of action. In COVID, I was working for Patients Safety Movement Foundation. And then I reached out to Patients for Patient Safety because I had gotten all this experience in the space. And we actually met with our lawmakers. We held an event at the White House talking about patient safety and the importance of patient safety. And I met with my lawmakers one-on-one. I met with my senator's health legislative assistants, and we talked about patient safety. And then I saw when I left Washington, D.C., that they actually posted something about patient safety. So like digging into the numbers is something I really enjoyed, coming up with like really good arguments for why members of Congress should, first of all, like know about patient safety and then support patient safety. All of that stuff is like, there's so many reports by like the national academies and stuff on this topic. You can really just get into the data and just your analytical mind as a scientist. It's like really exciting. But then the policy part of me thinks about the different actions that can be done to improve patient safety. So I literally helped plan a advocacy event as a scientist that working in policy, and that's kind of the my dream life is doing stuff like that.
And it sounds like you're building what I've read or I've heard defined as a portfolio career, right? You're not doing one thing. You are doing your writing, and then you're doing your science policy work, and then you're doing advocacy work and organizing events. And that's really cool to see that we can employ our skills as scientists and any other experience we've had. In your case, it was like 2.5 months, but look at the impact it's had on, the rest of your career. I want to step back a little bit and talk about, because I always like people to take away something from the episodes. How do you find your clients for your writing and science policy work?
Recently, my most recent client I found through ChatGPT. And I say that because they emailed me and they just sent me an email and they were like, "Hey, call me." And they just sent me their number. So I was like, okay, I don't know who this guy is. And then I always ask my clients, "How did you find me?" I'm just so curious. How did you find me? And they often tell me. And so he said, "I found you on ChatGPT," because apparently I don't know what he searched for, but he got my name through ChatGPT. So I was like, well, ChatGPT really changed it. I was really bitter for a while because ChatGPT kind of started doing my work as a writer in a way. And like there was another video that you had where that I watched that someone was talking about ways that ChatGPT hasn't really taken away the need for expert like medical writing and marketing writing and stuff like that. But I was so salty about it. And then I finally got a client through ChatGPT. So I was like, well, maybe it's not that, maybe it's just it's another one of those career twists and turns. Is like I never expected as someone that went to MIT that a robot would replace me in writing in any capacity, but it's kind of, but there are also upsides. So that's one way I get my clients now is through ChatGPT recommending me. I think through search results, like
Yeah, I think yes,
curated.
search results. Because somebody shared with me this week. It's so interesting you're sharing this because somebody shared with me this week. actually, this is a friend from high school. So she texted me and she said she was looking for something on a subject and she found one of my videos. So she literally took a screenshot from ChatGPT and sent it to me and said, look, ChatGPT is recommending your videos. So it's real. ChatGPT is, being used as a search engine. And I think we're going to see more and more these tools. I think that they should be treated as tools, right? They're tools. The way that I have come to think about them. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I think of AI tools as very helpful tools that can help us be more efficient. And like we are just sharing, if you're doing a really good job of search engine optimization for your business, if you're an independent business owner, these tools could actually start recommending you to folks. So it's really incredible that you found clients through ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's kind of changed the way I view content writing, like as a concept. Like now, sometimes when I write content, write it for I write it for people, but I also write it with this idea that robots are going to look through the content and find answers to stuff through there. So it
Yeah.
pays to add extra details, and that's where being a science writer comes in. It's like adding the details and the facts and the data. So it's been interesting. And honestly, the rise of ChatGPT has also influenced before I was just in what I called science communications writing. But then I realized that the policy work I'm doing is actually a separate thing. So I added the policy angle to my value proposition for my business. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, things are constantly in flux. And that's
Yeah.
part, and it can be fun to like realize that what you've been doing is that you can actually get a little bit more specific about the kind of stuff you enjoy working on. So I so besides ChatGPT, I get clients through Upwork. I get clients through my I guess you could say my digital media presence online, my presence online. I have a website. I have a small YouTube channel that's not as established as this one. I have a newsletter. I'm one of those freelancers. I don't do cold outreach. I think that makes me unique. Do you do cold outreach?
I've done some in the past. I've definitely, now I work in-house at a biotech company. So I don't do a lot of freelance writing, but the freelance writing work that does come to me, I am ghost writing for somebody right now. And that just came through my online presence too. So that works really well. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. I don't do a lot of cold outreach because I don't have time. I'd rather do things that,
Attract.
yeah, and do things that fulfill me. And then just the people come to me and then I save time, and it can be difficult trying to
Yeah.
sell yourself to different clients, like if they don't really need your services. So I try to just, I'm out there. If people need to hire me, they can, but I don't go out of my
Actively,
way
yeah. I think
to
there's
bother them.
several ways to do it, right? And cold pitching is just one way. But the ways that you're doing it too, like attraction marketing, I actually like that better, right? Because then by the time they show up in your inbox, they're convinced, at least they're like 50% the way convinced that they want to work with you. And it's not so hard to convince them. Whereas the opposite way, you have to do a lot of persuasion of the other person. So that's really cool. Let's talk to the person that is maybe in a PhD program right now and they're thinking of mastering out and doing something else, or somebody that has been an academic for a few years wants to do something else. What advice would you give? What's the career advice you would leave them with?
The biggest thing I learned transitioning from science to freelance and kind of becoming an independent freelance writer, communicator, small business owner is, and it's the best part about life, is you can take your past experiences with you. And because when I was in graduate school, after I left graduate school, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pretend like my PhD program thing never happened. And then I would constantly see neuroscience things and be like, oh, that's so interesting. And sometimes I'd search for them online and I'd want to explain them to people and stuff like that. But I realized after some time that you take your past experiences with you. So if you are in a PhD program and you want to master out of your program and you do master out of your program, or you decide to power through and get a PhD. I've heard of people that don't want to get a PhD, but they just do it because they're in a PhD program, which I think makes a lot of sense. That's probably what I would have chosen to do if I was given the option. But whatever you do in your career, like no matter what it is, you can always take your past experiences with you to your next career destination. And it takes a bit of creativity to figure out and introspection to figure out what your skills are and how they can help you. But one of the things I did, and I learned this in graduate school from my graduate school colleagues, my fellow graduate students, is thinking about your work as not in academia, but just like in terms of like concrete skills. So like instead of saying, oh, I did this study on such and such, you could say I independently managed a project or something like that. And just little things like that really help. And realizing that and I think another thing is science is it's kind of a niche area. Only people that really like science get masters and PhDs in this topic, and it can be very isolating to be navigating life with a science degree and just not being a scientist working in a lab. But there's actually increasingly so many people with science backgrounds doing writing work, policy consulting, all kinds of things, and especially the way that the internet is, if you have an interest and you have a science background, you can figure out a way that your science background plugs into whatever you want to do. I fully believe it's all about how you market yourself and how you portray yourself. And like me, if you want to, and sometimes the reasons you may portray yourself to be one thing or another aren't entirely by your skills. Like in my case, where I was like telling people I've worked in Congress, it was kind of to get more work in Congress related stuff, but also to pay my bills. So I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a job that pays your bills, even if it's not like the glamorous job you imagined, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just have to persevere and make the most of the situation until a better opportunity comes along.
So, so good. Thank you so much. And sometimes even the experiences that don't seem like they fall in your passion, like you rightly said, you take all those experiences with you, you take all those skills with you. They are skills that you can monetize later. So thank you so much, Shiva. If people want to find you and work with you or chat with you, where can they go?
You can find me at fancycomma.com or my personal website, shivaosma.com.
ShivaAsma.com or fancycomma.com. I'll make sure to leave all those links. Thanks for chatting with me, Shiva.